Coming up on this long-awaited episode of the Hockey Nuts, our favorite teams have an up and down weeks, some of us worse than others. We'll have all the details. Also, the injury wave continues across the league, and some of the game's biggest stars are affected. We have a couple of retirement announcements and a couple of World Junior Championship Tournament announcements this week. We'll have all this, plus some college hockey talk, the KHL Minute, and our picks of the week coming up next. This is the Hockey Nuts Podcast, Season 1, Episode 17, recorded on Friday, December 2nd, 2016. Welcome to the holidays.
Shut up and sit down.
Shot up the boards, but it was stopped. Good job by Kreider. Out of the corner, Nash. BC to Grady Shea for the shot. Save, big rebound. Nash has it. Save, rebound, score! Jimmy BC. It's a power play goal. And the Rangers lead it 3-2.
Cutting in the Carolina zone. Puck is left there. Look out. It's a 3-on-0, 4-on-0. Skinner leads the way. Hudobin makes the save. He had too many options. Skinner in back of the goal. Centers one. There's Ryan off the skate of Dominic Moore. Skinner's on it. Back again on the power play for Hannafin straight away. Here it comes. They score! Tipped in. Out in front. Possibly redirected by either Derek Ryan or Lee Stempniak. Maybe a Boston player, and if so, it's Hannafin's goal. Carolina with a 1-0 lead.
Wraps it around the boards. Marchand back to Krejci, over to Krug. Krug to Pasternak. Slings it low. Backus to Bergeron. Here's Krejci's shot wide on the stick side. Pasternak holds. Krug's drive. Save one. Rebound, scores. David Backus comes through with 31 and a half to go. One all into the third round. David Pasternak casually picks it up, accelerates toward Ward. Oh, he sold him and stuffed it.
This is just his personality. He's drifting up to the puck in the neutral zone, looking at the referee saying, can I go, can I go, can I go? And then they say, yeah, go ahead. And then he just comes down that off wing. He does that little slow down move. Change of pace, try to get Ward to be backing up, and that's what he was doing.
Skinner must score to extend the shootout. Anton Hudobin is the first Bruins backup to win a game in 24 games this season for Boston. The Bruins trailed into the final minute, but Backus pulls them even, and Hudobin shuts the door in OT with Pasternak registering the game winner.
Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Hockey Nuts Podcast. My name is Wayne. My co-host is Steve. He was not able to make it tonight. He's had a family emergency. His mother has been very ill all week, and he's been in the hospital tending to her. And we were planning on recording tonight, the two of us, but he got a call that he needed to get to the hospital. So hopefully everything's going well with him. But we did decide that I would go ahead and proceed by myself with the podcast this week, and we'll go ahead and run down because we don't want you listeners to go too long without a episode of the Hockey Nuts. So I will go ahead and go at it alone this week, and we'll pick it up again next week with both of us. At least that's the plan anyway, with both of us running the show. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the podcast a bit. First and foremost, I want to update everybody at the top with all of the ways to contact us. Of course, we have our website. That's at thehockeynuts.com. You can email the show at feedback@thehockeynuts.com. We'll take into account what you send us, and we'll be happy to discuss any of the emails that get sent to us. Also, we have a voicemail box. If you don't want to write an email, you can leave a voicemail at 919-960-1718. You can tweet me. I'm at WayneHalley9. You can tweet Steve. He's SBall504man. And you can also visit our Facebook page. We're at facebook.com/thehockeynuts. And of course, our YouTube channel, which if you just go to YouTube and search The Hockey Nuts, you'll find us without any problem there. And of course, with YouTube in mind, we do live stream YouTube, and we are going ahead and live streaming tonight. Okay, so let's go ahead and get going. Obviously, it's been 8 days since our last podcast, and it's been more than that now. It's been almost 10 days since our last podcast. So, and a lot of that's due to the Thanksgiving holiday. We did record early last week, getting the podcast out of the way so we could get on to our Thanksgiving weekend. And then, of course, with Steve having his family emergency, that has obviously delayed things this week. So let's go ahead and get started on the hockey news for the week. First and foremost, as we do every week, we'll go ahead and start with our teams. And I'll go ahead and start with the Boston Bruins, as of course that's my team. They've had several games since our last podcast. Way back on the 22nd of November, they had a 4-2 loss against St. Louis at home. They had a 3-1 loss at Ottawa on the 24th. That was Thanksgiving Day. They had a 2-1 loss against Calgary at home on the 25th. Then they had a 4-1 win against Tampa Bay on the 27th. A 3-2 shootout loss at Philadelphia on the 29th. And then finally a 2-1 shootout win versus Carolina on the 1st. That was last night as I record this. And I saw bits and pieces of most of these games. The loss at St. Louis, the biggest news coming out of that one was Zdeno Chara getting hurt partway through that game, and the Bruins, as a result, ended up losing that game. They pretty much fell apart after he left the game in that one. And then ever since then, they've really been struggling, not only to score goals, but to keep the opponents off the scoreboard. But they have recently updated Chara, and of course we'll get to the Chara injury later on in the podcast, that he may be coming back fairly soon. So that's good news for Bruins fan. As for the most recent game, I did watch that one in its entirety. Obviously, it includes two of the three teams that we talk about on a weekly basis, Carolina Hurricanes and the Boston Bruins. And that game was, as a Bruins fan, it was kind of disappointing. The Carolina Hurricanes had a 1-0 lead late in the third period, and it took a mad scramble and kind of a lucky bounce for Boston to tie that game with just a few seconds left in the game, and then they went on to win in the shootout. Carolina kind of owned the plays for the most part in that game, and they played fairly well. They played very tight defense. They attacked Boston before they could get anything going, and it just kept Boston back on their heels and looking fairly sloppy through that whole game right up until the end, until the Bruins finally tied the game. But the Bruins, bottom line was, they got out of there with 2 points, and hopefully they will get a couple of the players back that have been injured, and particularly in Chara. Hopefully they'll get things back on track. Now on to the Carolina Hurricanes, while we're on their topic. They had a busy week as well over the past week since we last recorded. They had a 2-1 win at Toronto on the 22nd. They had a 2-1 loss at Montreal on the 24th. That was Thanksgiving Day. A 2-1 loss at Ottawa on the 26th. A 3-2 win versus Florida on the 27th. A 3-2 loss at the Rangers on the 29th. And then a 2-1 shootout loss against the Boston Bruins last night. And of course, we just talked about that game. Carolina, on the score sheet, it was an up and down week. It's the biggest thing with Carolina right now is they're playing very well defensively as a team, but they are struggling to get goals on the board. As you can see, even their wins, where there are a lot of 2-1 games there. You see a 2-1 win, 2-1 loss, 2-1 loss, 3-2 win, 3-2 loss, 2-1 shootout loss. So all their games over the past week have been very low scoring, and they have been struggling of late to score goals. So that is one thing that Carolina will have to work on. And it was obviously a concern. We've talked about it in podcasts in the past that Carolina was the big question mark with them is whether or not they'll score enough goals to get enough wins. And over the past week, that really has been the case with that team. But overall, they seem to be playing better, and they're still trending ahead where they were last year at this time. And they're not completely out of the playoff picture at this point. So they're in pretty good shape in terms of at least keeping in the hunt for a playoff spot. But they do have a lot of work to do. So that said, let's go ahead and move on to the Rangers. They had several games again since the last time we recorded. Back on the 23rd, they got blown out by Pittsburgh 6-1. And then they had a 3-2 win at Philadelphia on the 25th. A 2-0 loss against Ottawa on the 27th, a 3-2 win against Carolina on the 29th, and a 4-3 loss at Buffalo on the 1st. And the biggest news story and of course the first was last night, the biggest thing coming out of that game was the return of Jack Eichel to the lineup for the Buffalo Sabres. He's been out for I think last night was his season debut, come to think of it. And he had a very big game to start with. So, Buffalo seems to be turning things around a little bit with the return of Evander Kane a week or so ago. And then now Jack Eichel is coming back. So Buffalo looks to be a dangerous team now going forward. But the Rangers are still playing fairly well, despite a couple of losses here over the past week. The 6-1 loss against Pittsburgh, I didn't see that game, but just seeing the score sheet, it just looks like one of those nights where Pittsburgh just happened to come in red hot and the Rangers just got caught off guard a little bit and just had one of those nights where you just kind of forget about it and move on and get on with the rest of the season and try to forget those types of games. Every team at one point or another has a game or two like that. So you just got to try to limit those games as much as possible. As for other notable games around the league over the past 9-10 days since we last recorded, the Caps beat the Blues back on the 23rd. Alex Ovechkin had a hat trick in that game, his first of the season. The Sharks just barely beat the Blackhawks on the 23rd. That was a 2-1 game. Blue Jackets beat the Lightning 5-3 on the 25th. The Wild beat the Pens 6-2 on the 25th. So that was just a couple of days after the Penguins' big win over the Rangers. So the Penguins have been rather inconsistent at times this year, and that's kind of been their MO over the years anyway, with a team as offensively gifted as they are. If they don't have that offense on a particular night, it can end up at the wrong end of a big score real quick with that team. On the 26th, the Penguins beat the Devils 4-3. The Kings beat the Hawks in overtime. That was the 5th straight win for LA, and that was on the 26th. So that was a big game for them, beating the Blackhawks. The Ducks and the Sharks, that's a big rivalry game out west. And that game went 3-2 Ducks on the 26th. On the 29th, Anaheim beat Montreal 2-1. Anaheim looks like they're turning their season around after having a rough start to the year. Any win over Montreal, as good as they are this year, is always a great win. On the 29th, also, Columbus beat Tampa Bay by a really sound score, 5-1. I was surprised to see that score. But at the same time, Columbus is playing very, very good hockey right now. They're putting up a lot of points on the board, on the scoreboard, meaning not just points in the standings. Their offense is clicking at a pretty good clip. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe they have the best power play in the league right now. On the 30th, the San Jose Sharks beat LA 4-1 in another California rivalry game. That was a good game. I watched a little bit of that before I went to bed. Those late games are hard when you live on the East Coast, when the games start at 10:30 at night. But I did watch a little bit of that game. St. Louis beat Tampa Bay. That was a 5-4 game. That was yesterday on the 1st. And then Chicago beat New Jersey 4-3 on the 1st as well. And the reason I mentioned New Jersey a couple of times is they've just been playing very well so far this year, even without having Taylor Hall in the lineup. And now Taylor Hall's coming back to the lineup, so Should be interesting to see if New Jersey continues to play as well as they have been. Okay, let's move on to transactions. There are a few transactions this week around the league. First and foremost, the Florida Panthers fired coach Gerard Gallant on Sunday. Quote from Gallant is, "I've been let go," Gallant told NHL.com prior to leaving PNC Arena in a taxi following a 3-2 loss against the Carolina Hurricanes. That's got to be awkward. If you're on the road, and PNC Arena is right here in Raleigh, right near us. I wasn't at the game, but it must have been awful awkward to see when, he gets let go right after the game and the team's leaving on the bus and he's leaving in a taxi. That's kind of an ugly way to go, but evidently he was on the hot seat because the Florida Panthers just haven't been playing up to their as well as they should for being a defending division champion. The Florida Panthers definitely need to be playing as better than they have been, particularly where their team is actually, in a lot of ways, better than the team, at least on paper, better than the team that they had last year. So hopefully Florida will get things turned around. But anyway, back to the article. General Manager Tom Rowe was named interim coach for the remainder of the 16-17 season. In addition to Gallant, assistant coach Mike Kelly also was fired. In seeking to earn a second consecutive playoff berth and bringing a Stanley Cup to South Florida, we believe that new leadership is required immediately, Panthers owner Vincent Viola told the Panthers website. The Panthers, who won the Atlantic Division with a franchise record 47 wins and 103 points last season, are 11-10-1 after 22 games. My focus is solely on returning our season around, fixing our special teams, and securing a playoff berth, Rowe said. Gallant was in his third season as Panthers coach. He finished second in the Jack Adams Trophy voting last season after he guided the Panthers to their most successful regular season in club history with 47 wins and 103 points. Gallant received 20 first-place votes and 203 points in the voting for the Jack Adams Award, and he finished 141 behind the winner Barry Trotz of the Washington Capitals and 128 ahead of third-place Lindy Ruff of the Dallas Stars. This marks the sixth time in Panthers' 23-year history they've made in mid-season coaching change. It previously happened in 2013-14 when Peter Horacek replaced Dineen after 16 games. Defenseman Ben Hutton signed a 2-year, $5.6 million contract with the Vancouver Canucks on Thursday. The former Maine Black Bear, Hutton, had 1 year remaining on his entry-level contract. The new contract is an average annual value of $2.8 million. Hutton was due to become a restricted free agent after this season. The Canucks selected Hutton in the 5th round, 147th overall of the 2012 NHL Draft. So that was all the major transactions that occurred over the past week. So we'll go ahead and move on to injuries now. Forward Bobby Ryan and defenseman Frederick Claesson have been placed on injured reserve by the Ottawa Senators. Ryan re-injured the index finger of his right hand against the Buffalo Sabres on Tuesday. Claesson left during the third period against the Philadelphia Flyers on Thursday with a hip injury. Ryan sustained the bone bruise on his right index finger against the Nashville Predators on November 17th when he was hit by a puck. After missing 2 games, he returned to play the next 4, but he had difficulty holding his stick and left the game against the Sabres after playing just 2 minutes and 50 seconds. He was placed on injured reserve after that game, Dorian said, and is eligible to play on Wednesday against the San Jose Sharks during the Senators' 4-game road trip. Ryan has a broken finger in his left hand in each of the past 2 seasons and has missed 4 games. Detroit Red Wings forward Dustin Abelkader will miss 2 to 4 weeks with a sprained MCL in his right knee, the Detroit Free Press reported on Friday. Abelkader was injured during the first period of a 2-1 overtime loss to the Florida Panthers on Thursday in a collision with Panthers forward Vincent Trocheck. Abelkader, who has 4 goals and 4 assists in 22 games, becomes the latest Red Wings player who will miss significant time with an injury, joining forwards Andreas Athanasiou, Tyler Bertuzzi, Darren Helm, defenseman Brendan Smith, and Alexei Marchenko, and goaltender Jimmy Howard. Goaltender Craig Anderson took an indefinite leave of absence from the Ottawa Senators to be with his wife, who began cancer treatment on Wednesday. Nicole Anderson was diagnosed with throat cancer and started chemotherapy and radiation treatment in New York. Anderson won't be available when the Senators host the Philadelphia Flyers on Thursday. Mike Condon will start, and Andrew Hammond, who was recalled from Binghamton of the American Hockey League earlier this week, will be the backup. Coach Guy Boucher said on Wednesday. And obviously, hopefully, the Craig Anderson situation hopefully will take a turn for better news. Okay, center Jack Eichel had a goal and assist in his season debut for the Buffalo Sabres in a 5-4 win against the Ottawa Senators at Canadian Tire Center on Tuesday. After missing the first 21 games because of a high ankle sprain, Eichel sparked Buffalo to a 2-0 lead in the first period, assisting on Kyle Oposo's power play goal and making it 2-0 with his first goal, also on the power play to help the Sabres win for the first time in 3 games. So it's good to see Jack Eichel is back playing for Buffalo, at least for them anyway. Speaking of Buffalo Sabres goaltender Robin Lehner left the game Tuesday against the Ottawa Senators in the first period after injuring his hip and his day-to-day. Lehner was relieved by Anders Nilsson with 2:12 left in the first after allowing a goal on 6 shots. He appeared to sustain the injury when he came out of the net to attempt to play the puck prior to leaving. Sabres coach Dan Bylsma described Lehner's injury as a cramp. So he's probably day-to-day. If that sounds like that injury is a little bit on the minor side, so hopefully he'll be back soon. Boston Bruins defenseman John Michael Liles has a concussion and will be out indefinitely, the Bruins announced prior to their game with the Philadelphia Flyers on Tuesday. Liles was injured during the first period of a 4-1 win against Tampa Bay Lightning on Sunday when he tripped over Lightning goalie Ben Bishop's stick and fell awkwardly into the end boards. Liles, who's 36 years old, has 5 assists in 22 games so far this season. I saw that play, and it wasn't any kind of play that deserved a penalty. He looked like he was attempting to cut close to the net and either go around the back of the net or go into the boards to get the puck. And he, essentially just tripped over Bishop's stick and just fell. Looked like it went shoulder first, but then slow motion revealed that he did, in fact, hit his head pretty hard on the boards. So hopefully he'll be all right. So, but it sounds like he's sustained a pretty good concussion there. And also talking about concussions, Carolina Hurricanes forward Jordan Staal sustained a concussion against the Florida Panthers on Sunday and has been placed on injured reserve. There's no timetable for Stahl's return, General Manager Ron Francis told the News and Observer on Monday. The Hurricanes recalled forward Philip Di Giuseppe from Charlotte of the American Hockey League to take his place on the roster. Stahl, who's 28, left the game in the first period after taking a stick to the head from Florida defenseman Jason Demers. The Hurricanes defeated the Panthers 3-2 for their 6th win in 8 games following a 3-6-4 start in that game. And that's a huge loss for Carolina. Jordan Stahl's one of their leaders. Not so much on the score sheet anyway, but he is probably one of their better defensive forwards, and that leaves a big hole in the lineup for the Carolina Hurricanes. Defenseman Alexander Edler will miss 4 to 6 weeks because of a fractured index finger on his left hand, leaving the Vancouver Canucks without either player from their top defensive pair. Edler, who was scheduled to have surgery on Monday, was injured early in the first period when he attempted to block a shot by Colorado Avalanche forward Carl Soderberg in a 3-2 shootout win on Saturday. His regular playing partner Christopher Tanev hasn't resumed skating because of a lower body injury that has kept him out of the lineup since November 2nd. With Tanev out at least another week, it won't be easy to replace Edler, who leads Vancouver in averaged ice time per game and plays on the top power play and penalty kill units. Edler has a goal and 2 assists in 21 games this season, but has been regularly matched up against the opponent's top forwards. All right, we have a bit of a Craig Cunningham update. As for, remember, going back to last week, Craig Cunningham is the American Hockey League player that collapsed on the ice during the pregame ceremonies and has been in the hospital ever since. Friends for a decade and teammates at 2 stops in their hockey career, Milan Lucic has been seeking constant updates on Craig Cunningham's condition since learning that he collapsed on the ice before an American Hockey League game in Tucson on November 19th. So with his Edmonton Oilers landing in Phoenix on an off day Thursday before playing the Arizona Coyotes on Friday, Lucic knew where he had to be. He rented a car and made the 2-hour drive to Tucson and spent a few hours with Cunningham in his hospital room at Banner Medical Center, and then some more time with Cunningham's family and friends, sharing stories and a few smiles. Cunningham, who's 26, remains in critical but stable condition and has not regained consciousness since collapsing before Tucson played Manitoba. The good news is he's progressed a lot from the state he was in last weekend, Lucic said. He's heading in the right direction, but obviously there's a lot more progression and healing to be done. I can't go into details too much more on that. Being one of my best friends, to go there and show my support was something I needed to do. I didn't want to overload him too much, knowing that he needed to get some rest. I just wanted to do my part and show my support to him and his family, and I think it was important to kind of take their minds off of what was going on. Talk about me, talk about my family, and bring a positive vibe. So that was real nice of Luch to go in there and visit him. And, of course, one of the stops that they referred to was when Lucic and Cunningham played together for the Boston Bruins for a short time a couple of seasons ago. But it was awful nice. And the other time that they were teammates was back when they were both in juniors before they both got drafted. So those guys go back quite a ways, and apparently they're pretty good friends. But either way, it was nice of Luch to go and pay Cunningham a visit and finally to get some news as far as what his condition is. I had no idea that he was still hadn't regained consciousness, so it's obviously pretty serious what happened to him. So again, our thoughts and prayers are with the Cunningham family as they try to get through this time. The Detroit Red Wings placed goalie Jimmy Howard on injured reserve on Saturday after he sustained a lower body injury in a 5-4 overtime win against the New Jersey Devils on Friday. Howard, who will miss at least the next 7 days, was injured in the first period when his skate got caught in the ice. He allowed one goal, playing 11 minutes, 31 seconds. Skate getting caught on the ice. Man, I've had that happen to me. In fact, it happened to me last week. I got my skate caught in a rut as I was pivoting out of a face-off circle when I was refereeing, and it catches that edge, and you just go straight down. And it was... when you're not expecting it, it hurts, to say the least. So I'm not sure exactly what the injury was with Jimmy Howard, with his skate getting caught on the ice. It could be anywhere from a knee to an ankle, probably one or the other. So hopefully he'll get back out there soon. Chicago Blackhawks captain Jonathan Toews left the game on Wednesday against the San Jose Sharks in the second period with an undisclosed injury. Toews went to the locker room after leaving the ice with 11:17 remaining in the second, shortly after he fell awkwardly into the boards. He skated 3 shifts for 1:32 ice time in the period. And then there was an update today, just before I recorded this. The Chicago Blackhawks placed Jonathan Toews on injured reserve, retroactive to the November 24th, and activated defenseman Trevor Van Riemsdyk from injured reserve. The Blackhawks captain and top center has an undetermined timetable to return from the upper body injury that will sideline him for a 5th straight game when Chicago plays the Flyers on Saturday. Toews hasn't been ruled out for the game against the Jets at the United Center on Sunday, but the Blackhawks won't rush him back. The injury is related to his back, according to the Chicago Sun-Times. Putting Toews on injured reserve gave the Chicago Blackhawks the roster space that they needed to activate Van Riemsdyk to play against the Flyers. And Van Riemsdyk has missed 20 games since October 21st when he sustained an upper body injury crashing into the goalpost in the third period at the Columbus Blue Jackets. So that was just the update today anyway, was just a simple roster move to get the space for Van Riemsdyk to come back. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done that with Toews. Montreal Canadiens defenseman Nathan Beaulieu was released from a hospital Wednesday after being hit with the puck in the throat area during the second period of a 4-3 loss to Ottawa on Tuesday. Canadiens coach Michael Therrien said Beaulieu will miss Montreal's home game Thursday against the Carolina Hurricanes and is also likely to miss the game at the Detroit Red Wings on Saturday. He could not give a more detailed timeline for Beaulieu's return. The Canadiens called up defenseman Mark Barbero from St. John's of the American Hockey League on Wednesday and sent down defenseman Joel Hanley. Barbero will make his season debut Thursday, playing on the third pair with Greg Patterin, who was a healthy scratch in the past 2 games. Now, this story is actually a week old, so the references to Thursday and Tuesday and Saturday was actually talking about last weekend, just to let you know. And a couple more stories that are over a week old, but still relevant because it's happened since we last recorded. Philadelphia Flyers center Sean Couturier will miss 4 to 6 weeks with a lower body injury. Couturier, who was placed on injury reserve, has a small MCL tear in his left knee, but will not require surgery. CSNPhilly.com reported on Wednesday. He was injured 1:40 into the second period of the Flyers' 3-1 win at the Florida Panthers when his legs got tangled with Panthers forward Vincent Trocheck and had to be helped off the ice. Couturier has 5 goals and 8 points in 20 games. And finally, on these injuries, Boston Bruins defenseman Zdeno Chara sustained a lower body injury in the second period of a 4-2 loss to the St. Louis Blues at TD Garden last Tuesday, and he hasn't played since. Chara had one shot on goal in 9:04 of ice time in that game. The Bruins captain has a goal, 6 points, and a +12 rating in 19 games so far this season, and 179 goals and 581 points in 1,294 NHL games with the Islanders, Senators, and Bruins. The Bruins are 2-3-1 since Chara went down. And they sent out another update today. Bruins defenseman Zdeno Chara is nearing return to the lineup but will not play against the Sabres at KeyBank Center on Saturday. Chara took part in full practice on Friday at Warrior Ice Arena in Boston for the first time since he sustained lower body injury in the second period against the Blues on November 22nd. And Chara has missed 5 games. So looks like Chara is coming close to returning. Hopefully we'll see him in the game probably at the start of next week. Looks like he won't be playing this weekend. So they need him back because they haven't played well since he left. And a lot of people in Boston are saying that Chara's done and he's not playing well and he's old. And, there's been a lot of negative stuff about Chara in recent months, particularly since the end of last season. But with him getting injured, it kind of showed how much he's actually doing for the Bruins because they just haven't played well since. So hopefully they can get him back very, very soon. All right, let's move on to suspensions and fines, which actually there were none this week. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next category of milestones, records, and honors. And there were a couple of them over the past week, a few of them actually. Forward Travis Moen on Tuesday announced his retirement from the NHL after 12 seasons. Moen, who's 34 years old, played 23 games for the Stars last season. He was selected by the Calgary Flames with the number 155th pick in the 2000 NHL draft. He has 59 goals and 77 assists and 801 penalty minutes in 747 games for the Blackhawks, Ducks, Sharks, Canadiens, and Stars. He actually has a Stanley Cup ring with the Ducks back in 2007. He had 7 goals and 5 assists in 21 playoff games that year during the Ducks playoff run. He had 11 goals and 8 assists in 83 career playoff games. So Moen has been one of those grit guys pretty much his whole career. So it was good to see him finally get to retire. Mark Howe has spent his life in hockey and considers it the best possible life to have lived. His contributions to the game will be rewarded when he receives the Lester Patrick Trophy for outstanding service to hockey in the United States. Howe and the ECHL co-founder Pat Kelly will receive the Lester Patrick Trophy in Philadelphia on Wednesday, along with the 2016 inductees to the United States Hockey Hall of Fame, who are former NHL player and Boston Bruins standout Craig Janney, along with longtime high school hockey coach Bill Belisle, and the 1996 U.S. World Cup team, who won the championship of that World Cup. Howe finished his NHL career with 742 points in 929 NHL games, but if you add his WHA totals to that, he had 1,246 points in 1,355 games. He was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2011. Howe became a professional scout with the Red Wings after he retired, and since 2005 has been their director of professional scouting and a trusted advisor to Red Wings general manager Ken Holland. Ottawa Senators goaltender Craig Anderson, New Jersey Devils left wing Michael Camilleri, and San Jose Sharks defenseman Brent Burns have been named the NHL's 3 stars for the week ending on November 27th. Anderson paced the NHL with 4 wins, compiling a 1.25 goals against average, .960 save percentage, and 1 shutout in 4 appearances to lift the Senators to second place in the Atlantic Division. Camilleri led the NHL with 4 goals and 8 points to power the Devils to a 1-0-2 record in his 3 appearances. Burns ranked first among defensemen with 6 points in 4 games as the Sharks won 3 of their 4 games to maintain second place in the Pacific Division. And finally, Matt Carle retired from the NHL last Friday. The 32-year-old defenseman played 6 games for the Nashville Predators this season. Carle had 45 goals and 238 assists for a total of 283 points and was a +82 in 730 games with the Predators, Lightning, Flyers, and Sharks. He was the 47th pick in the 2003 NHL draft by the San Jose, and in 2006 won the Hobey Baker Award, given to the best player in the NCAA Division I men's hockey at the University of Denver. And I remember him playing for Denver against Maine in the NCAA tournament for a couple of years there, too. I think they played each other 2 years in a row, if I remember right. Okay, now let's go ahead and move on to other interesting stories around the hockey world. Center Nolan Patrick, the possible number 1 pick in the 2017 NHL draft, was one of 32 players chosen by Hockey Canada on Tuesday to take part in Canada's national junior team selection camp next month that will help determine its 22-player roster for the 2017 IIHF World Junior Championship. Patrick, who's 6'3", 198 pounds, an A-rated skater on the NHL's Central Scouting Players to Watch list, has missed the past 18 games for Brandon of the Western Hockey Leagues because of an upper body injury. Canada's selection camp will be held December 11th through 14th at Centre d'Excellence Sports Réseau in Blainville, Quebec. It will feature 3 games, including 2 matches against Team of U Sports, formerly CIS All-Stars, on December 12th and 13th, and a final match against the Czech Republic on December 14th. And I've included in the show notes the entire list of players that were invited to this camp for Canada. I'm not going to go ahead and list them right now, but I will just shout out a couple teams of interest to the listeners of this podcast anyway. First and foremost, Jake Bean, who plays for Calgary of the Western Hockey League. He's a Carolina Hurricanes prospect. He'll be there. Jeremy Lauzon, who plays for Royan Noranda of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. He's a Bruins prospect. Julien Gauthier, who plays for Val d'Or in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. He's a Hurricanes prospect. And the only player going to this that is NHL or draft eligible, in other words, he's an underage kid that hasn't been drafted yet, Nolan Patrick. He's actually the only player going to this camp that hasn't been drafted yet. Other players, Nicholas Waugh of Chicoutimi in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, another Carolina Hurricanes prospect. And then finally, Zach Senyshyn of Sault Ste. Marie of the Ontario Hockey League. He's a Bruins prospect, and he will also be there. There were no Rangers prospects listed in this group of players, just to note for you Rangers fans. And speaking of World Junior Championship training camps, 4 first-round NHL draft picks were among the 34 players invited to Russia's training camp for the 2017 World Junior Championship. Goaltender Ilya Samsonov, selected by the Washington Capitals with the number 22 pick in the 2015 NHL draft, and forward German Rubtsov, picked by the Philadelphia Flyers at number 22 of the 16 draft, are 2 of the 28 players that will attend a camp in Novogorsk, Russia, starting on December 8th. In 18 games with Metallurg Magnitogorsk in the Continental Hockey League, Samsonov has 11 wins, a 2.14 goals against average, and a .934 save percentage. He's actually having a fantastic season with them. I've noticed he's consistently at the top of the stats among goaltenders in that league. So it's crazy to think that the Washington Capitals have a guy like Samsonov when they still have Braden Holtby there. So it's a pretty good goaltending situation they have there in Washington. Rubtsov has 3 shots on goal in 12 games with Podolsk of the KHL and 15 points in 15 games with Chekhov in the Russia's Junior League. 6 players skating in North America will join the camp when it moves to Kingston, Ontario on December 19th to the 24th. Among them will be defenseman Mikhail Sergachev and forward Denis Gurinov. Sergachev, selected by the Canadiens with the number 9 pick in the 16 draft, was in their opening night lineup and was a +1 in 3 games before being returned to his junior team, Windsor of the Ontario Hockey League. He has 7 assists in 11 OHL games. Gurinov, the number 12 pick in the 2015 draft by the Dallas Stars, has 3 goals and 6 assists in 19 games with Texas of the American Hockey League. Russia will play in Group B in the World Junior Championship, which runs December 26th to the January 5th in Toronto and Montreal, along with Canada, Latvia, Slovakia, and the U.S. Announced on Thursday the 1st, the Vancouver and Victoria, British Columbia will host the 2019 IIHF World Junior Championship. It will be the second time Vancouver has hosted the Under-20 International Tournament. The 2006, the city hosted with Kelowna and Kamloops, British Columbia. Games will be played at Rogers Arena in Vancouver and Save On Foods in Memorial Centre in Victoria, BC. Canada will play all of its games at Rogers Arena. The 2017 World Junior Championship, which runs December 26th through January 5th, will be held in Montreal and Toronto. And the 2018 World Junior Championship will be in Buffalo. So that's 3 straight years that the World Junior Championships are being held here in North America, because they do occasionally have them over in Europe as well. I really wish I could go to the one next year in Buffalo. That would be it's always a fun tournament to watch. Ottawa Senators owner Eugene Melnyk took another important step Thursday in his bid to build an arena in downtown Ottawa. The National Capital Commission, which oversees the LeBreton Flats on the western edge of downtown, announced Melnyk's Rendezvous LeBreton organization is the preferred proponent to develop the 53-acre site. Rendezvous LeBreton is a 135-member team of urban planners, transportation experts, architects, and environmental advisors that spent 14 months assembling a 2,000-page proposal called Illumination LeBreton, which was submitted on December 15, 2015. The Illumination LeBreton proposal has an 18,000-seat arena as its main feature. The plan also calls for adjacent open square that would accommodate 28,000 people, a 2-rink practice facility, and a 250,000 square foot multipurpose recreational facility. The proposal also includes 2.8 million square feet of retail space and 5 neighborhoods with 4,400 residential units. Senators President Cyril Leader said in January that if Rendezvous LeBreton bid were to be accepted, the Senators could be playing downtown as soon as 2021. The Senators' current arena, Canadian Tire Center, is located 17 miles west of downtown Ottawa. All right, that's it for all of the major stories going around the league. It's a little difficult to get through those when you're by yourself, not having your partner here to bounce some of these ideas off of, but we got through them anyway, so we will go ahead and move on to the next item on our agenda this evening, and that is the HockeyNuts.com weekly power rankings for this week. And we had noted in past episodes that Steve and I are going to alternate giving a top 10 for each week, so that'll help mix it up for everybody for the week. Last week I did the top 10, so this week it's Steve's turn, and he did get me the top 10 or his top 10 list over to me. So I will go ahead and read you off number 10. If your team is not named as part of the top 10, you can see where they are in the full rankings by checking out the show notes. I've got all 30 teams listed in the show notes for the weekly power ranking. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do the top 10. And at number 10, I've got Tampa Bay. Number 9, I've got San Jose. Number 8, I've got Columbus. Number 7, Washington. Number 6, Ottawa. Number 5, Pittsburgh. Number 4, St. Louis. Number 3, New York Rangers. Number 2, Chicago. And back at number 1, we have the Montreal Canadiens. So the biggest notables there, obviously, we have a new number 1. Montreal and the Rangers have seemingly been alternating spots. Although this week, Chicago was able to wedge themselves in at number 2 as they're continuing to play very well. And actually, if they continue to play as well as they are, they could end up number 1 within the next week or two. Another notable is the big climb this week from number 8. St. Louis is up to number 4. They've been playing very well of late. Also, Ottawa Senators, who have been off the map, have jumped all the way up to number 6. They were number 18 last week. And again, that was probably on the heels of Anderson becoming one of the NHL 3 stars of the week, really driving the Ottawa Senators to the top of the standings. So they're playing very, very well. Okay, so let's take a look at what is upcoming over the next week. Of the upcoming schedules, now, our next scheduled podcast recording is on Wednesday. That's just 5 days from now. So it's going to be obviously a short week for our teams this upcoming week. For Boston, I've got just 3 games between now and our next recording. They're going to be at Buffalo on Saturday, the 3rd. They're going to be at home against Florida on the 5th. And then they're going to be at Washington on the 7th. Now, that is a very tough schedule considering how much Boston's been struggling recently. and the fact that, Buffalo is not the same Buffalo team that they've had to start the year because Jack Eichel and Vander Kane are both back, as I mentioned earlier. So that team is beginning to play very well. Florida, with their recent coaching change, could prevent a tough test for Boston, because they've kind of had a fire lit under them in terms of the players anyway. So that is going to be a tough game for Boston to win. And then, of course, the Washington Capitals are one of the elite teams in the East, so that's going to be another tough game for Boston. So if they can get out of there with 2 wins out of 3 games, I would be very happy with that. The Rangers have just 2 games over the next 5 days. They've got Carolina for the second time in a week. They've got Carolina at home on the 3rd. That's a matinee game for them. And then they've got the Islanders on the 6th, and that's at the New York Islanders. So they're going to make that long road trip from Manhattan to Brooklyn to go play the Islanders at the Barclays Center. So that should be a fun game to watch. There's a pretty serious rivalry there between the Rangers and Islanders. That's always a fun game to watch between those two. And then finally, Carolina has 3 games over the next 5 days, and that starting with the Rangers game on Saturday, as I said before. And then on the 4th, on Sunday, they play at home against the Tampa Bay Lightning. I'd love to go to that game, but I'm going to be reffing a bunch of games in the morning and then doing men's league in the evening. So my day is pretty much spent just being on the ice myself. And then finally, they start their annual West Coast California road trip with a trip out to Anaheim on the 7th for a late game out there, and then they're out there for 3 or 4 games beyond that. So the Carolina Hurricanes are going to be going out west. It's going to make it much more difficult to watch them because all those games start at 10 or 10:30 at night East Coast time, and that's a little late for most of us to watch. So other games that are going on around the league against among teams that are at the top of the standings right now. Montreal is playing at San Jose on the 2nd. That's actually tonight as we speak. Actually, it might not have started already. Anaheim is at Edmonton on the 3rd. Washington is at Tampa Bay on the 3rd. Minnesota is going to be at Edmonton on the 4th. Ottawa is going to be at Pittsburgh on the 5th. Montreal playing at St. Louis on the 6th. And Ottawa is playing at San Jose on the 7th. All of those games are going to be must-watches. If you like to see good teams play against other good teams, all those games that I just mentioned are all going to be good games to watch. All right, let's move on to some college hockey talk, shall we? And first and foremost, last week, the University of Maine had just 1 game. It was against Brown of the ECAC, and they won that game 5-1. That was on Saturday night, the 26th, and that game was actually held in Portland, Maine, not at Orono, Maine, at their home rink. And Maine always seems to do well when they play in Portland. They always have. I remember as a kid we would go Thanksgiving weekend visit family in Maine, and if the University of Maine had a game in Portland during that weekend, we almost always went to the game. So that was the latest edition of the Thanksgiving weekend Portland, Maine game for the University of Maine. They always draw a good crowd in that arena, and that's an arena without an American Hockey League team now. The Portland Pirates used to play there, but Portland Pirates left town and left that city without a team. So they drew very well for that game, and that win brings Maine's record now to 5-7-3 going into this weekend. And speaking of this weekend, Maine has a home-and-home against the University of New Hampshire, or as us Maine Black Bear fans call it, University of No Hardware, on the 1st and the 2nd. That's tonight and tomorrow night as I record this podcast. As for other games that went on around the NCAA, just list a bunch of games that had upsets among the top-ranked teams in the country. Number 19, St. Lawrence tied number 3, Quinnipiac. That was officially a scoreless tie in that game. Unranked Princeton beat Bemidji State, who's the number 10 team in the country. That was a 4-1 game. Number 11, Minnesota lost to Northeastern 6-4, but that was at Northeastern, I believe. Number 16, Michigan lost to Lake Superior State, who is also an unranked team. That was a 3-1 game. And unranked Michigan State beat number 5 North Dakota 4-3. All those games were last Friday night. On Saturday night, the 26th, Princeton beat Bemidji State for a second time. That was a 3-1 game, and again, Bemidji State is the number 10 team in the country. Number 20, Vermont upset number 3 Quinnipiac. So that's 2 losses on the weekend for Quinnipiac again. That was a 5-1 score. Michigan State tied North Dakota, and North Dakota is the number 5 team in the country. Michigan State's unranked. That was a 2-2 game. So North Dakota only ended up with 1 out of a possible 4 points against Michigan State on the weekend in that series. And then finally on Saturday, the 26th, the number 12 Notre Dame lost to Clarkson 2-0. And that was also an unranked Clarkson. All right, as for this weekend coming up, there's a lot of big games, or a few big games around the NCAA. Number 20, Michigan is going to be at number 7, Penn State, both Saturday and Friday night. Number 10, Ohio State is going to be at number 11, Minnesota, again Friday and Saturday night this week. And number 8, Harvard is going to be at number 19, St. Lawrence. And that game is just Friday night. And number 17, St. Cloud State, is going to be at number 16, Western Michigan. And those take place both Friday and Saturday night. And number 18, Union, is going to be at Quinnipiac. That one is just a Saturday night game. And then rounding out the ranking, the high-ranked matchups, probably the matchup of the week, number 3, BC will be playing number 9, North Dakota. And that game is also Saturday night. However, the game is being played at Madison Square Garden in New York City. And if you have CBS Sports, I think it's called CBS College Sports Network, which we have here on Time Warner Cable here in the Carolinas, if you have that game, that's definitely going to be a must-see game. That'll be a fun game to watch. That game will be on, and I believe it's a 7 p.m. start for that game, Saturday night. All right, let's move on to the NCAA rankings for the week, and at number 10, I've got Ohio State, number 9, North Dakota, number 8, Harvard, number 7, Penn State, number 6, BU, number 5, Quinnipiac, number 4, Mass Lowell, number 3, Boston College, number 2, Denver, and again this week, number 1, Minnesota Duluth. Minnesota Duluth is 10-2 on the year, by the way, so they are doing very, very well. And of course, Maine got no love this week, nor would they, because they're kind of an up and down team so far this year. All right, let's move on to our KHL Minute. Steve actually sent his in, and it's actually similar to mine, but we'll go ahead and start with mine because it's a bit of a history lesson for you hockey fans out there. November 1946 was a crucial month in the history of Russian hockey. It marked the foundation of Dynamo Moscow, however you want to call it, the first hockey club in the Soviet Union, and saw the birth of a new powerhouse in the sport. The Blue and Whites were on the road for the club's 70th birthday on November 22nd, but after returning to Moscow for Wednesday's game, they were eager to mark the occasion in style. The class of 1946-47 went on to win the inaugural Soviet Championship. Sergei Oreshkin's current roster in a less than impressive condition. Dynamo's proud record of reaching every playoff in the KHL era is under serious threat as the team rattles around in mid-table in the West. Recent form has been poor going into the game against Barries. Dynamo had not won in regulation in over a month since a 3-0 victory against Jokerit. The team picked up the first 9 points in 9 games over that period. So it was just a noting of Dynamo Moscow's 70th anniversary that happened over this past week. And I noted on there too, Moscow Dynamo, I remember when I was a kid, back in and I looked up the official what's going on because I vaguely remember the game, but I looked it up and I actually found the game on YouTube. I included a link in the show notes for this. Way back in 85-86, Dynamo Moscow and the Soviet Red Army team actually came over and played. And this was before the Russians started coming over and playing in the NHL. This was probably 2 seasons before. There were no Russians playing in the NHL at that time, save for a couple that defected Russia or at the time was Soviet Union. There were a couple players who defected and came over and played, but Soviet players did not have permission to come over and play in the NHL in those days. But they sent 2 teams over in 85, 86, and it was billed the Soviet Super Series. They went around the league and played several of the NHL teams. Well, Moscow Dynamo came in and played the Boston Bruins at the Old Garden. And I actually found that game on YouTube, like I mentioned before. The link is in the show notes. A name that if you're familiar with the 1980 Olympics, Vladimir Mishkin was in net for the Red Army team that night when the USA upset the Soviets 4-3 in the 1980 semifinal game. The game billed the Miracle on Ice, but the year that the Dynamo team came over and played the Bruins, Mishkin was again in net for Moscow Dynamo. And I watched a little bit of the game, the replay or the YouTube, and looking at the jerseys, the Dynamo's jerseys are remarkably similar to the jerseys that they wear today. Right down to the logo on the front of the jerseys, practically the same. So I was pretty surprised to see that. But just a history lesson, back then, Moscow Dynamo won that game 6-4 against the Bruins. And in that Super Series, the 2 Soviet teams that came over went a combined 7-2-1 against the NHL teams that they played that year. And Dynamo went 2-1-1 in that Super Series, and the Red Army team went 5-1 in the Super Series. Now, the Bruins didn't play the Red Army team, but they did play Dynamo. And of course, as I said before, they lost. The Red Army team in those days had the KLM line, Vladimir Krutov, Igor Larionov, and Sergei Makarov, widely known in those days as 3 of the best players in the world, even though none of them played in the NHL, as of yet anyway. All 3 eventually came over, but back then they hadn't come over yet. And another note on that Red Army team went in their own league 32-3-5 that year. So that Red Army team in particular was known as was called essentially the best hockey team in the world, even compared to NHL teams. So it's kind of interesting to watch those games back in those days when those Russian teams would come over, back before the Russians were allowed to come over and play in the NHL. And the Russian league, because of the fact that they had all those players, was very much on par with the NHL. And they proved that they were just as good as the NHL. They went 7-2-1 against them that year. So it would have been interesting if they would have come up with some sort of a World Series or something like that. Obviously, NHL wasn't going to give up the Stanley Cup and have them play for the Stanley Cup, but it was an interesting time to be a hockey fan, to say the least. Now, Steve's KHL Minute involves that same game. Actually, no, it wasn't that same game. His in NHL includes the same team, Dynamo Moscow, but it talks about the game between CSKA and Dynamo Moscow, which Dynamo Moscow won 3-2 in a shootout. Legendary coach Anatolia Tarasov was remembered during this game. His son and daughter were there for a ceremonial drop of the puck to start the game. Tarasov was the first great CSKA and Team USSR coach and one of the pioneers of Soviet hockey. And this is obviously before Viktor Tikhonov took over the team. Tikhonov was the coach of record during the 80 Olympics, but Tarasov was one of the early pioneers, like Steve said, for the Team Soviet Union and the remarkable runs that they went on in international play in those days. So we'll go ahead and move on to our picks of the week, and I'll go ahead and give you Steve's pick of the week. He did get that to me. He talked about Jack Eichel's triumphant return after a high ankle sprain kept him out of the first 21 games this season. He had a goal and an assist to help spark Buffalo to the 5-4 victory over Ottawa in Ottawa Tuesday night. Oh, and he also returned, he also scored 2 goals against the Rangers game over this past week, and that was a 4-3 win for the Sabres. So he has 4 points in his first 2 games back already. And he noted that Eichel did not appear to be slowed down or tentative on his skates whatsoever. Obviously, Steve watched the game between Buffalo and the Rangers, and Eichel seemed to be at least to have returned to the form he had last season. This is good news for the Sabres and bad news for the rest of the Eastern Conference, in particular the Atlantic Division. Now, Eichel's a great player, obviously. This is, my thoughts on the topic. And he's, he got picked 2nd overall right behind Connor McDavid. And some people even had him as being better than McDavid, although McDavid is looking pretty good. So again, it's good to see Eichel's back anyway for the Sabres. And they are very excited for him to be back. My pick of the week is about, and I alluded to it briefly earlier in the podcast, Bill Belisle, a hockey coach. He's actually a high school hockey coach who is going to be inducted into the USA Hockey Hall of Fame. How would a high school hockey coach be inducted to the USA Hockey Hall of Fame, not ever having coached above the high school level? Well, Bill Belisle is the head coach of the Mount St. Charles out of Woonsocket, Rhode Island high school hockey team. It's a private Catholic high school out of Woonsocket, Rhode Island. But the numbers that have been put up at that school are remarkable. And I remember this even when I was playing high school hockey in the early 90s, and I would pick up copies of the Hockey Night in Boston. It's a newspaper that I don't even know if it's still printed. I think they still have a website, but I don't know if they still print newspaper. It was a newspaper that was distributed to rinks around New England. It was a newspaper called Hockey Night in Boston. I used to read it every time it was a monthly. They would send it out each month. And it would basically talk about all the prospects that are playing throughout the New England area. And Woonsocket, Rhode Island, Mount St. Charles always came up, even back in those days, as one of the top high schools in New England, and certainly the top high school in Rhode Island, which is where they are from. Just some of the numbers. He has over 900 wins as a high school hockey coach in his career. He's actually approaching 1,000. I think he should break 1,000 this season. He had a run of 26 consecutive state titles. Now think about that. 26 consecutive years this high school won the state championship in high school hockey. And not only has he got 26 consecutive state titles, he has 32 state titles overall. So he has been their head coach at this high school since 1977-78. And from 1977-78, those seasons, all the way to 2002-2003, those are the 26 years straight that they won the state title. Now, here's a list of players that played for that school during his many years behind the bench. Okay. Of the first 3 U.S.-born players selected number 1 overall in the NHL draft, 2 of them came from Mount St. Charles. Brian Lawton in 1983 and Brian Berard in 1995. So with Lawton and Berard playing for Mount St. Charles, there have been 7 players drafted first overall from the United States of America, and 2 of them played at that high school. Now, some of the other names that have come out of that school, Matthew Schneider, Brian Boucher, Keith Carney, Paul Gay, Jeff Gilson, and Garth Snow all played for Coach Belisle. He's coached for 41 years, has a record of 990 wins. This was as of the writing of this article. On November 28th was when the article was written. He has 990 wins, 183 losses, and 37 ties over 41 years. That's a winning percentage of 81.8%. And he's put so many players through the NHL. Obviously a great, great coach. And everyone who was interviewed for this article, it's quite a long article, and I've included a link to it in the show notes. But everyone who was interviewed for this article had nothing but great things to say about this coach. And sounds like he truly, truly deserves to be inducted into the USA Hockey Hall of Fame. But it's good to see coaches at the lower levels to be recognized as well. Okay, so we'll go ahead and finish up the podcast by doing a little bit of listener feedback. I got a message through our website a couple of days ago. It is from a gentleman by the name of Mac. He is listening to us from the UK. He writes in his message, "Keep up the amazing work, lads. It's hard being a hockey fan from the UK. You guys keep me up to date in the best way possible. As I'm a new hockey fan, what would be your best tips to learn your team? And second question, and the rules. I know the basics." Well, as far as learning our teams, I can't speak for the Rangers because I don't follow them as closely as I do the Bruins. But I know if you want to get a good inside scoop on what's going on with the Bruins, and in fact, you may not be able to see it. I probably shouldn't have mentioned it, but there is a show that airs on local TV in Boston and here in the U.S. called Behind the B. And it's a kind of a documentary. This is the third season they've run it. And what it is just essentially behind the scenes. They got a camera crew following the team every step of the way through the season. And you get to see the real kind of what it's like to be a member and a part of that organization. It's a really, really interesting series. One of the other podcasts I listen to, one of the co-hosts of that podcast, the podcast I listen to is a Black and Gold Hockey Podcast, and this podcast is strictly about the Boston Bruins. But one of the co-hosts of that podcast is actually also a gentleman from the UK, and he tried to watch that series, and I heard him mention on a recent podcast that he's unable to get it through normal means, but I guess because it says it's not available in your area. This is what he referred to. But obviously, there are ways around those kind of restrictions, but I won't get into that on this podcast. But anyway, if you can get access to that podcast, at least for the Bruins anyway, that's a fantastic series to get to know the team in general, because you get to know them on a more personal level than you would just simply watching the games. And I know some other teams, I don't know if the Rangers have a similar show to that or not. Steve would have to answer to that, and maybe we can talk about that on next week's podcast when he returns. And then as for the Carolina Hurricanes, they don't really have a series like that. But the biggest thing with them, the biggest thing to learn a team is obviously simply watch the games, and if you can get access to the broadcast of that team. So if you want to follow the Bruins, if you're watching through the NHL.TV access, you can choose which broadcast, the home or away, that you can listen to. And if you always listen to the broadcast coming from the team that you want to learn about, let's say, for example, you want to watch the Boston Bruins, well, if you listen to their announcers, you can get a lot of information about the team from those home announcers. And, same thing for the Rangers, same thing for the Carolina Hurricanes. If you can get those streams rather than just the generic stream that comes up, or the nationally televised ones, they do talk. All the teams' announcers are kind of homers around this league, to put lack of a better term. They talk more about the team that they're covering than the visiting team or the opponent that they're playing that night. So that's a great way to learn the team. As far as the rules of the game, there's lots of stuff on the internet that you can find that can teach you the rules of the game. I don't have any specifics because different levels of hockey have different rule books that they go by. NHL has their own rule book. College has their own rule book. And then, of course, the amateur levels like youth hockey and whatnot, that's a separate rule book as well. Although the USA hockey rules mirror very, very closely to the international IIHF rule book. Very, very similar to USA hockey. And as I understand it, the European leagues that play over there also closely mirror the IIHF rule book. And the rules do change periodically through, every season you get a few minor rule changes. So anyway, as for the rules, the best way to learn the rules essentially is to watch lots of games, and you'll eventually pick up some of the basics. Another good way, and I don't know if you're up to it, Mac, but go out and play the game. There's no better way to learn the rules of the game than to actually play it. I don't know if you're feeling up to playing. I know there's rinks in the UK. There's actually a pro league there. There's actually a pro league there. I know that league is mostly made up of Canadian players that have gone over to play over there, and a few players on each team are from the UK as well. I know it's not a very high-level league, but it's certainly somewhere to start. Going to games in person is really a good way to learn the rules. There's a lot more to see that doesn't get shown on TV if you go to a game in person. So if, short of playing the game yourself, the next best thing would be to actually go to live games as much as you can, and at as a higher level game as you can get access to. Now, with you would be the British Elite League, or Super League, I think is what it's called. That's the closest thing you've got anyway to high level hockey right there in the UK. And then finally, just watching NHL games as much as you can. You watch enough games, you'll pick up on it. I mean, the game there's a lot of rules, but of course, it comes right down to it. Is pretty simple. The penalties would be the hardest thing to learn. All the little different subtleties on the penalties, because it can get confusing at times. Why they call this at this time and not the same thing at another time. There's a lot of the gray areas when it comes to the referees calling penalties. Well, one guy may call it one way, another guy may call it another way. So that kind of stuff, if you can get through those muddy waters, that's a whole nother level. I'm still learning some of the stuff, in that sense. But yeah, I would suggest, first and foremost, play if you can. Secondly, go visit an arena near you and watch games. And then third would be obviously watching as many games on TV as you can. So anyway, thanks for the feedback, Mac, and hopefully you'll keep listening to us. And again, if you also want to give us any feedback, if you're a listener that has been listening and want to chime in, we'll certainly answer any questions that you have, and at least to the best of our ability anyway. And with that in mind, if you want to email the show, you can. We're at feedback@thehockeynuts.com. You can call the show. That's at 919-960-1718. Or you can tweet me. I'm at WayneHalley9. And Steve is at SBall504man. And, of course, we have the Facebook page at The Hockey Nuts, facebook.com/TheHockeyNuts, I'm sorry. And, of course, our website at thehockeynuts.com. And finally, our YouTube channel, which currently the only thing we're doing on it is live streaming the podcast. But in the future, I would like to put some kind of tutorials similar to what Mac from the UK has suggested. Tutorials on the game, rules of the game, how to play the game, that kind of stuff. I would like to get to that, but that's down the road quite a ways. Okay, well, that's pretty much all I have for the podcast. And, of course, Steve's not here, so he can't chime in and give us any more. So I will go ahead and wrap things up for this week. And until next week, we will catch you at the rink.